Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Just as I'm getting set to record, what happens from there? Oh, I don't know. A little bit of a spicy meatball of a topic falls from the heavens. As Shaedon Sharpe, who was the #1 high school player in America, committed to Kentucky class of 2022, he recently enrolled early as a reclassification candidate. Well, as it turns out, we find out that he is actually eligible for the 2022 NBA draft. Something that everybody said wasn't possible, although I told you that it was. I talked about it before. We'll get into me in a minute. But we find out that the #1 high school recruit in the last year's class, he is enrolled for this spring, has not played a minute yet. But we find out that he is now eligible for the 2022 NBA draft, which means that John Calipari in Kentucky, in the middle of a fascinating dream season, has a really interesting choice to make. Do I potentially play a top 5 pick? Because if Shaedon Sharpe, whenever he goes into the draft, he is a top 5 pick, top 10 pick at worst. Do I play a top 5 pick and potentially ruin the chemistry of the team that I currently have, a team that Aaron Torres, I believe, is good enough to win a national championship? Or do I let him sit on the bench? Do I let him practice? Do I not play him and risk losing him at all? And so let's get into it. Let's break it down. And let's go back to this whole process of how it happened, because I hate to say it, this isn't a segment of where Aaron was right, where Aaron was wrong, but I was right on this one. Because if you remember, Shaedon Sharpe commits in the fall. He is the #1 high school player in the current senior class, high school class of 2022. And at some point in the fall, we find out that he has decided to reclassify and enroll for the spring semester at Kentucky. At the time, I said, be careful, Kentucky fans, because I believe that Shaedon Sharpe, if he decides to reclassify and enroll for the spring, will be eligible for the 2022 NBA draft. And if he's eligible for the 2022 NBA draft, he will probably end up being a top 5 pick. When that happened, I had a bunch of people in the media, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. No, that's not true. He's not a member. He will not be eligible for the 2022 NBA draft. And the reason that people said he would not be eligible for the 2022 NBA draft is pretty straightforward. I've told you this a million times, but to be eligible for the NBA draft, you have to meet 2 qualifications. You must be 19 years old in the year that the draft takes place. So in this case, 2022 NBA draft, you have to be born sometime no later than the end of 2003, which means that you will turn 19 in this calendar year. That's 1. And then 2, you have to be a year removed from high school. And so when everybody said, oh, he's not going to be eligible, it's because they were under the assumption that he was a high school graduate of 2022, even though he enrolled early. I said, I'm not sure about that. I don't believe that. I am not positive. My understanding is that he will technically be eligible for the NBA draft. Well, what happens? As I said, ESPN report on Thursday, everything I said all along was right. I told you he'd be eligible for this year's draft, and now John Calipari's got a decision to make. And so let's get into all of the dynamics of it, what it means, what could happen, what I would do, and then what I ultimately believe John Calipari would do. And even before we get into it, I do think it's worth mentioning one thing. I don't think there is any definitive set-in-stone plan for Shaedon Sharpe. In other words, I don't think there is a plan where we are definitively going to the draft, zero doubt about it, whether we play 1 minute, whether we end up being the leading scorer, whether we lead Kentucky to a national championship or not. I don't believe they have definitively decided that they're going, but I don't definitively believe that they have decided that no matter what happens, we're staying for the 2022-2023 season, even though, of course, the guy that kind of runs his recruitment, the guy, kind of one of his guys in his camp says, oh, we've always been planning on being here next year. Yeah, baloney. And so what I would say, if you're a Kentucky fan, before we get into what could happen, what should happen, what will happen, I think we now have to live in the reality that it is more likely than not that Shaedon Sharpe is not a member of the 2022-2023 Kentucky Wildcats. Not saying that he can't stay, not saying that he won't stay, but what I am saying is at this point you should not expect to see him in a uniform next year, which sets up the interesting paradigm of what happens this year. So what happens this year? This kid has been enrolled for about 2 or 3 weeks, and for people who don't know the background, I think most of you probably do, John Calipari's been pretty straightforward about this. John Calipari has never ruled out the idea that this kid could play, but John Calipari has also said point blank, we are not going to put him out there before he is ready to play. And so now that we definitively know that he is eligible for the NBA draft, and first of all, I believe that Kentucky knew about this before the report broke on Thursday. I saw my buddy Kyle Tucker. He's got me blocked on Twitter, but I still saw your tweet, Kyle Tucker. I still saw your tweet. He says that Calipari and Kentucky knew about this prior to Thursday. I tend to believe that my old buddy Kyle Tucker is right on that. But what I do think it sets up is an interesting paradigm, right? Because again, if you play him, it could hurt chemistry. If you don't play him, you could let a top 5 pick walk out, top 10 pick walk out without playing at all. So here is all the scenarios that could happen. First of all, let's be glasses half full for just 1/2 second. I'm a glasses half full guy. Let's be glasses half full. The first scenario is you end up deciding to play him, even though Calipari to this point has not played him. And I think the first scenario is he helps your team. He's really good. He's a potential top 5 pick. And you go ahead and add him to a lineup that is already ranked number 12 in the country, that as I record here on Thursday night is currently sitting at 15-3 overall. And there is the possibility that that team that's 15-3 overall, ranked number 12 in the country, all of a sudden goes from really, really, really good, one of the top, I would say 5, 6, 7, 8 teams in the country, to a number 1 seed and maybe the best team in college basketball. You add Shaedon Sharpe to this core on paper, this looks like a team that's probably the best team in the country because they're already, I believe, at worst top 10, probably top 5, top 6, top 7, somewhere maybe right behind that Arizona, like that tier, maybe just a shade behind them. But you add Shaedon Sharpe, you had a top 5 pick. On paper, that's a really good team, and on paper, it elevates your program. Here's the problem, and forgive me for using the ultimate corny cliche, but games aren't played on paper. And why I would be worried to play him is I believe that you could completely mess up the chemistry of this team. And I know what a lot of you Kentucky fans are thinking. Who cares? He's a top 5 pick. If we can play him, you got to play him. Well, you know who else wants to play in the NBA besides Shaedon Sharpe? Your starting point guard, Sahvir Wheeler. And you know who else wants to play in the NBA besides Sahvir Wheeler? Your starting shooting guard, your starting off guard, whatever you want to call him, combo guard, Ty Washington. And you know who else wants to play in the NBA? Kellen Grady, graduate transfer, and Jacob Toppin, and Keon Brooks, and I could go on. Every single player wants to play on that roster. And right now, if you haven't watched Kentucky, I'm just going to tell you, all the pieces fit together perfectly. You got 2 really good guards in the starting lineup in Sahvir Wheeler and Ty Washington that play well off each other. Either could play point guard. You have a shooting guard named Kellen Grady who is shooting 43% from 3 and averaging 12 points per game. You have a kind of a big combo hybrid forward in either Keon Brooks or Jacob Toppin, and you got big Oscar down low, a first-team Torres Media All-American. We'll get into our All-American list in a minute. And so if you play him, it throws off the dynamic of everybody because the lineup, the rotation is almost perfect as we speak. They have 3 really good guards in the starting lineup, a 4th off the bench with Davion Mintz. The front court is figured out. And if you play this kid, it completely changes the dynamic of everything. So ironically, you know what this actually reminds me of? Do you remember over the course of the summer when Kofi Cockburn, another first-team Torres All-American, by the way, when Kofi Cockburn entered the transfer portal after he withdrew from the draft at Illinois? And there was real talk that for about 2 weeks, a week and a half, 3 weeks, whatever it was, I can't remember, that Kofi Cockburn was in fact going to transfer to Kentucky. And the reports were at the time that the staff and the program was divided because the staff and the program basically sat back and said, wait a second now. We know that this guy absolutely on paper makes our roster better, just like I said with Shaedon Sharpe. But if you bring him in, it completely changes the roles of every single person, all the guys that have been here since June. And so I kind of think it's the same thing with Shaedon Sharpe. Kentucky in the spring chose not to bring in Kofi Cockburn because they basically said, look, we're backing up. We think he's really good, but we think he's going to mess with the chemistry. And I think Shaedon Sharpe could do that. Not because he's a bad kid, not because the other guys don't like him, but because basketball is a team sport and all the puzzle pieces have to fit. And right now, those puzzle pieces fit perfectly at Kentucky. And if you do decide to play this guy, then all of a sudden those puzzle pieces don't fit as easily as they do now because, again, all these guys have been practicing together since June. And so to me, that is where it becomes fascinating. Do you play him? It certainly on paper would elevate your team, but it also could hurt the chemistry. I think that's also why if I was John Calipari, I would just consider not playing him. Not because he's a bad kid, not because the other guys don't like him. And by the way, this is all assuming there's no injury, right? If two of their starting guards go down and you need a guy, yeah, it's good to have a top 5 pick potentially on your bench ready to go. But at the same time, I think you don't, if it was me, I would not play him for 2 definitive reasons. One, because it absolutely messes up the chemistry of your team. I know you can sit there and say, well, these guys are all adults and they have to learn and fight for their spot. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just telling you. I've been watching basketball a long time, and I have seen how one little thing can mess up chemistry for a team, a program that really has great chemistry, and Kentucky has great chemistry right now. I think there's another possibility that you also have to consider as well in this unique situation. What happens if you play him? There's always the possibility that it hurts the team. But what if he isn't ready? And what if he just isn't good? And then what happens then? Because now you talk about a Pandora's box that you could potentially open. Think about everything that could happen if you play him and he's not ready. 1, it messes up the chemistry. 2, it could hurt his draft stock, which could hurt you with future picks. Shaedon Sharpe comes in as a top 5 pick. He plays. He's not ready. He declares. He goes. He's a second-round pick. Oh, no, what just happened? And so in some ways you can't play him, or you shouldn't play him to protect this kid in his own right. I'm telling you, if this kid declares, he's going to be a top 10 pick just based on potential alone. For people who've never seen him play, 6'5", 6'6" guard, super athletic. I mean, I'm talking super, like you watch film of him and you're like, oh my God, did he really just do that? And so if you play him, you can mess up chemistry, but you could mess up his draft stock as well. And there's a possibility that you mess up this year and you also mess up next year by not bringing him back. And then, oh, by the way, there's the worst case scenario where you mess him up so bad that he transfers because, again, we live in the one-time transfer world where he comes in, he plays at Kentucky, it's a disaster, and he leaves. I don't think that particular scenario is really in play, but you never know. And so to me, you just talk about a darn near impossible situation for Kentucky. And by the way, Kentucky had a sort of similar situation a few years ago. They brought in a mid-year enrollee named Hamidou Diallo, but even that one was different. And the reason it was different was pretty straightforward. First of all, when Hamidou Diallo enrolled, everybody knew he was eligible for the next NBA draft. He was a year removed from high school. He was doing a postgraduate year, so everybody knew he was eligible. And so Kentucky came in knowing the possibility that there was a 100% possibility that he could declare and that he would probably go through the process. Difference with Shaedon Sharpe, I don't believe, whatever. The point is, they knew coming in that he was that he could definitively declare and definitively could. But the other major difference was Hamidou Diallo was a major project, and I remember I didn't even have a podcast at the time saying this kid is way far from being ready to be an NBA player. And so that was the fundamental difference with the Hamidou Diallo situation. The fundamental difference is that Hamidou Diallo wasn't going to be a top 10 pick, and this kid is going to be a top 10 pick. And so again, I think it's a really tough spot for Calipari. You play him, you mess up this year's team, you could potentially mess up this kid. He could play well, but the team tanks. He could play well, but other guys' draft stock tanks. And so I think it's a very, very, very peculiar situation. The one thing I would say, now that we know that he's eligible, let me just put it out there. I don't believe, unless he plays and it's a complete disaster, that if he declares he's coming back, because I saw a little bit of this, let him test No, if he tests the waters, he's going to test off the charts, he's going to be great at all these combines and events, and somebody's going to take him early. And so what I said that I would do, I just told you. If it was me, what I would do, I wouldn't play him. I wouldn't play him unless there was an injury or unless the team needed a spark or unless everybody falls off or whatever. But right now you're playing really well. Right now you have a team that I believe is good enough to win a national championship. And if you lose this guy without him ever playing a minute, you lose him without ever playing a minute. But I think the risk of playing him, hurting his draft stock and hurting your team, to me, I wouldn't. Now, what do I think Calipari's going to do? Calipari's already been hinting since the kid got to campus that there was a chance he could play this year. Calipari has said many times that if he's ready, we're going to put him in. And so I think Calipari's going to play him because I think Calipari's known all along I could lose this kid by the end of this year, and I might have no choice but to play him. So that is what I would do. I would pump the brakes. I'd say, look, my man, if you leave, you leave. I love you. We can't mess with what we got right now. We got a good thing going. We want you back. If you leave, you got to leave. That's what I would do. Calipari, I think he's going to play him. It'll be fascinating to watch. I know that, listen, and let me wrap by saying this. A couple things. One, Kentucky, first of all, fans, if you lose them, it's not the end of the program, okay? My buddy Matt Jones, I thought he brought up a great point. Kentucky is really good this year. They don't have a lot of clear-cut NBA draft guys. And so there are a lot of guys that can come back. If this kid leaves, it's not the end of the world. The program will go on. You still have a top 5 class coming in. And oh, by the way, you're going to have some returnees that are really, really good as well. That's one. Two, what I would also say is that, when it comes to this kid, there is the possibility that he comes back. Now, they're going to say all the right things, his quote-unquote camp, his parents, whoever you can get a hold of, whoever these reporters can get a hold of, they're going to say the right thing. And there is the possibility that the kid comes back, whether he plays this year or not. I wouldn't play him. I think Calipari does, but it is going to be fascinating to watch going forward.